When I first rolled into Oakfield Estates, I thought I'd finally found the kind of neighborhood people dream about. You know the type, the kind of place real estate brochures call peaceful suburban living. Every lawn was trimmed like a golf course, mailboxes lined up with military precision, and kids darted around on bikes while their parents waved politely from driveways. It looked safe, stable, predictable. After years of moving around for work, I was ready for stability. I pulled into my new driveway in my Porsche, the one car I allow myself to enjoy guilt-free after decades of long shifts and messy cases. To me, it wasn't a toy, it was a trophy of survival, something I'd earned the hard way. I didn't know at the time, but that car alone was enough to paint a target on my back. The first person who approached me was Sandra Hull. She moved fast, like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. She was dressed in what I can only describe as HOA armor, khakis, a pastel blouse, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was an extension of her spine. Her smile was wide, her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes? Cold. Calculating. "Welcome to Oakfield Estates," she said, reaching out for a handshake. Her grip was firm, but it wasn't friendly, it was controlling. "I'm Sandra Hull, Vice President of the HOA. We're so glad to have you here." On the surface, the words sounded warm. But the way she looked past me, scanning my Porsche, my yard, even the way my moving boxes were stacked, made it clear I was already being judged. "We have standards here," she added, in the same tone someone might use to warn a child not to touch the stove. I smiled back, choosing to give her the benefit of the doubt. "I'm sure I'll fit right in. I've read the bylaws, and I don't think you'll have any issues with me." She tilted her head, that smile stretching a little wider, but her eyes stayed hard. "We'll see." It was subtle, but I'd dealt with people like her before, people who needed to control, who thrived on power in the smallest ponds they could find. Sandra wasn't welcoming me, she was sizing me up. That first night, as I unpacked boxes and set up my home, I couldn't shake the sense that the neighborhood was watching. Curtains twitched when I walked to the curb. Cars slowed a little too much when passing my driveway. It wasn't paranoia, it was the kind of observation I'd been trained to notice. Oakfield Estates looked perfect, but underneath the surface, something was off. The next morning confirmed it. As I walked out to grab the paper, Sandra was already making her rounds, clipboard in hand. She paused in front of my house, scribbled something, and then waved at me like nothing was unusual. No smile this time, just that look. I didn't say anything. I just tucked it away in my memory. By the end of the first week, my mailbox held its first official notice, a fine. According to Sandra and her board, my Porsche was parked improperly. Improperly, on my own driveway. That's when I understood this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And Sandra had already decided I wasn't someone she could control. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding. I'd been the new guy before. I knew how people could test boundaries. But something about the speed of that fine, the way Sandra wasted no time, told me this wasn't a test. It was the opening shot in something bigger. That night, as I sat in my kitchen with the fine notice spread across the counter, I felt the first spark of anger. But underneath that anger was something sharper, awareness. Sandra might have thought she was picking a fight with just another neighbor, someone who'd eventually cave to pressure. What she didn't know was that I had faced down worse than HOA bullies. Sandra Hull was about to learn a lesson the hard way. Oakfield Estates looked like the picture of calm, but calm was just the mask. And masks always slip. The first fine, I tried to ignore. Everyone makes mistakes, right? Maybe the HOA had a strict rule about driveway parking that I hadn't understood. But by the second week, it was clear, this wasn't about rules. This was about me. The second notice arrived tucked neatly in my mailbox, printed on official HOA letterhead, bold red letters screaming violation. According to the board, my grass was excessively long. I laughed out loud reading it. I'd cut the yard 2 days earlier. You could still see the mower stripes. My yard looked better than half the houses on the block. But I paid attention to detail. Sandra paid attention to power. The third violation came only 3 days later. This time it was for leaving my trash bins out too long after pickup. I knew for a fact I'd pulled them in within the hour. My doorbell camera even had a time-stamped clip of me rolling them back to the garage. But logic didn't matter here. Sandra wasn't enforcing rules, she was building a case. By the end of the month, I had a stack of fines on my counter thick enough to pass as a paperback novel. Parking. Grass. Trash. Noise. Even excessive exterior lighting, which was laughable considering the neighborhood looked like a Christmas display every night. I decided to confront it head-on. The next HOA meeting fell on a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse. I arrived early, carrying the entire stack of fines in a folder under my arm. The room smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase markers. Folding chairs lined the walls, a long table stretched across the front where the board sat like judges, pens in hand, eyes sharp. Sandra sat at the center, her clipboard swapped for a sleek binder. She looked up as I walked in, her smile as fake as ever. "Mr. Marshall," she said, voice dripping with sugar. "Glad you could join us." I took a seat directly across from her. The meeting droned on for 30 minutes, budget reports, landscaping contracts, talk of repainting the pool deck. Then came violations and compliance. Sandra cleared her throat and launched into a report. "We've had several concerning issues with one of our newer residents. Multiple fines issued for repeated disregard of community standards." Her eyes slid to me, gleaming with satisfaction. That was my cue. I stood, walked to the table, and dropped the folder with a satisfying thud. Dozens of eyes turned my way. I pulled out the stack of fines and spread them like a dealer laying down cards. "Let's talk about these," I said evenly. "Every one of these is bogus. Parking in my own driveway. Grass cut 2 days prior. Trash bins rolled in within the hour. I have timestamps, video proof, and receipts." The room went still. Sandra tapped her pen against the table, unfazed. "Rules are rules, Mr. Marshall. If you can't handle them, maybe this community isn't a good fit for you." There it was. Not even trying to hide the threat. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the back of the room. One neighbor shifted uncomfortably, eyes down. Another gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod. Fear was the language here, and everyone understood it. I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough that the edge cut through. "I don't play games, Sandra. If these fines don't stop, we're going to have a bigger problem than trash bins." Her smirk never wavered. "You're welcome to appeal through the proper channels. But the board stands by its decisions." Translation: you're not winning this fight. The rest of the meeting blurred past, but I caught glimpses of Sandra's allies on the board watching me like vultures circling. No matter what I said, the outcome had already been decided before I stepped into that clubhouse. When I left that night, the air outside felt heavier, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Porch lights flicked on as I passed. Curtains twitched. I could almost hear the unspoken message riding on the wind: "Don't push back. Don't cross Sandra." But I'd been in darker rooms, stared down worse faces than hers. Sandra thought she had me boxed in, but what she didn't know was that every fine, every smirk, every word she said was fuel. She wasn't breaking me down. She was building me up. This wasn't about grass, trash, or parking anymore. It was a battle for control. And Sandra had just declared war. The fines I could shrug off. Annoying, sure. Harassment, definitely. But paperwork wasn't going to break me. I'd lived through worse storms. What I didn't expect was how fast Sandra's little game would turn criminal. It started on a quiet Wednesday morning. The sun had just burned through the fog, and I stepped outside with my travel mug in hand, ready to head to work. For a moment, everything looked normal. Birds on the wires, sprinklers hissing across lawns, the faint smell of fresh mulch in the air. But then my eyes landed on the Porsche. I froze. Every tire was flat. Not just low on air, slashed. For clean, deliberate cuts, deep into the sidewalls. Jagged, angry wounds that no nail or pothole could ever cause. My gut tightened, and I felt that old cold training response kick in. Threat assessment mode. I scanned the driveway, the street, the houses across the road. No movement. No witnesses. Just silence, heavy and waiting. That's when I saw it, the note. A plain white envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. I slid it free, unfolded it with steady hands. Next time, we take it. That was it. No signature, no flourish. Just a promise written in block letters. My blood ran cold, but not with fear. It was clarity. This wasn't about grass or bins anymore. This was intimidation. A warning shot. And warnings always mean escalation. I pulled out my phone, snapped photos of everything, each tire, each cut, the angle of the note on the windshield. I crouched low, capturing close-ups with my watch in the frame for timestamps. Then I walked back inside and pulled up my doorbell camera feed. Sure enough, motion alerts pinged from 2:43 a.m. 3 figures, hooded, moving fast. Grainy but clear enough, one crouched by the tires, one stood lookout, one scribbled on paper before slipping it under the wiper. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Morales, the same officer who'd taken my earlier complaint, showed up within the hour. Stocky, seasoned, with the weary patience of a man who'd seen it all. He crouched by the tires, whistling low. They weren't subtle, he muttered. I handed him the note in a plastic bag. They want me out, I said flatly. Morales nodded. This isn't just HOA squabbling. This is criminal mischief, maybe conspiracy. We'll file the report, but you need to be careful. These people aren't amateurs if they're escalating like this. Keep your cameras rolling. I already am. When he left, I stood at the window, watching his cruiser roll away. Across the street, a curtain twitched shut. Someone was always watching in Oakfield Estates. The problem was, most of them were too afraid to speak. That night, I walked into the next HOA meeting with a folder. Photos, timestamps, video stills. I dropped them on the table in front of Sandra, just like I had with the stack of bogus fines. She leaned forward, studied the pictures for half a second, and let out a soft, theatrical sigh. Someone slashed your tires? That's awful, she said, voice flat as cardboard. Her board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. But you know, Mr. Marshal, she added, eyes locking on mine, when you call out neighbors, you make enemies. And when you make enemies, bad things happen. The room went silent. I stared back at her, my jaw tight. Or you make victims, I said, my voice low and steady, by looking the other way. Her plastic smile curled tighter, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Around the room, I saw fear etched on faces. People avoided eye contact, shifted in their seats. One older man gave me the faintest nod, like he wanted to say more but didn't dare. Fear had turned this neighborhood into Sandra's empire. But I wasn't one of her subjects. That night, after the meeting, I doubled down. Motion-activated lights on every side of the house. Extra cameras angled at the driveway and the street. Cloud backups, encrypted, triple redundancy. If they came again, I'd catch every second of it. This wasn't paranoia. It was insurance. And insurance was exactly what I'd need, because Sandra and her crew weren't done. The note made that clear. They hadn't just declared war. They'd made it personal. The night after the HOA meeting, Oakfield Estates no longer felt like a quiet suburb. It felt like enemy territory. Every creak of the fence, every passing headlight painted across my blinds, every bark from a neighbor's dog made my instincts snap awake. The air wasn't peaceful anymore, it was charged. I'd seen this before overseas, in dusty towns where smiles hid ambushes. Only this time, the battlefield was my driveway. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. The first order of business was visibility. I bought industrial-grade motion lights, the kind that lit up a yard like a prison yard. Every corner of my property glowed under a harsh white beam. Then came the cameras, 2 new wide angles at the curb, another one tucked under the eaves above my garage, one more pointed at the Porsche from a high angle. I wired them all into a cloud system, triple encrypted, feeding live to my phone. By midnight, my house was less a home and more a command post. But surveillance was only half the job. The other half was intelligence. So, the next morning, I made my rounds through the neighborhood. Casual walks. Friendly waves. Eyes and ears open. I noticed which curtains twitched when I passed. Which neighbors couldn't meet my eye. Which driveways had strange tire treads leading in or out late at night. One man, Mr. Rowland, 2 doors down, stopped me as I passed. His voice was hushed, nervous. "You didn't hear it from me," he whispered, "but Sandra's been bragging. Says she's got people who can handle things." I nodded, thanked him, and kept moving. Confirmation. She wasn't hiding it anymore. By the third day, my patience wore thin. The cameras had caught nothing but raccoons and delivery trucks. But my gut told me it wouldn't stay quiet. Criminals never fire one shot and walk away. Not when they've tasted control. So, I adjusted my approach. I set up decoys. A second set of car keys left visibly on the counter, framed by the window. A dummy lockbox by the side gate. Even a pair of old sneakers left by the Porsche, just to bait anyone thinking of a quick midnight slash and dash. Then I waited. Waiting is an art. Most people break under it. Their nerves fray, their focus slips. But I'd spent years in surveillance vans, breathing recycled air, staring through one-way glass, waiting for a suspect to make a move. Patience was my weapon. It paid off on a Sunday night. At 2:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Camera alert. 3 figures moving down the street, hooded again, deliberate, tight formation. But this time, something was different. They weren't crouching by my tires or tossing notes. They moved with a swagger, like they owned the place. And then I saw it, badges flashing at their belts, tactical vests gleaming under the light. Fake cops. They marched straight up my driveway, flashlights sweeping, one of them barking in a mock authoritative voice, "Open up." Marshal service. My blood ran hot, not with panic, but with resolve. They had no idea who they were playing with. Inside, I stayed still, watching through my cameras, recording every second. My trap was sprung. They thought they were hunting me. They didn't know I'd been hunting them all along. The game had shifted. The quiet war with Sandra had officially gone tactical. And she was about to learn what it meant to pick a fight with someone who was the law. The pounding on my door rattled the frame. U.S. Marshals, a voice barked, sharp and rehearsed. "Open up immediately." I didn't move. Instead, I switched screens on my phone, toggling between the front door camera and the one angled at the Porsche. Sure enough, 2 of them had broken formation, one circling around toward my garage, the other heading straight for my car with a Slim Jim glinting in his hand. Real cops don't split like that. Real cops don't work in silence while one pretends to yell authority at the front door. I let the pounding continue. The lead man shouted again, voice cracking this time. "Open this door, or we'll force entry." I smiled. "Do it. Please." Slowly, deliberately, I slid my badge from its case and clipped it to my belt. Then I holstered my sidearm. I wasn't going to fire unless I had to. But I wasn't stepping out unarmed either. I pulled the door open. 3 men froze mid-motion. They weren't in uniforms, just tactical vests, black cargo pants, ball caps pulled low. Their badges were shiny plastic knockoffs, dangling on cheap chains. Up close, it was pathetic. Halloween costumes, dressed up with menace. The leader recovered fast, shoving his fake badge toward me. Marshal's service. We have a warrant for the seizure of your vehicle. Step aside. My eyes locked on his, unblinking. Then, slowly, I held up my own badge, real, gleaming, heavy with weight and history. Funny thing, I said, my voice calm but sharp as glass. Because I am a U.S. Marshal. And I don't recall signing off on any warrant tonight. The silence hit them like a gunshot. The lookout by the Porsche stiffened, keys halfway in his hand. The leader's face drained of color. The third man shifted his weight, like he was considering running. You've got about 10 seconds, I continued, stepping onto the porch, to decide whether you want to add impersonating a federal officer to the long list of felonies you're already clocking. The leader stammered. This isn't what it looks like. I raised my phone, screen lit up with the live camera feed recording everything. It looks exactly like attempted grand theft auto, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, caught in high definition. Want me to keep listing? No one moved. The cul-de-sac was silent except for the hum of streetlights. My neighbor's curtains twitched, faint shadows behind glass. Everyone was watching, but nobody dared step outside. The third man finally bolted. He turned and sprinted down the street. That broke the spell. The one by the Porsche dropped his tool and stumbled after him. The leader hesitated, his fake badge trembling in his grip, then cursed under his breath and ran too. I didn't chase. I didn't need to. Every angle, every move, every word was already logged and streaming straight to the sheriff's office. I holstered my phone and stood in the driveway, my breath steady. The Porsche gleamed under the motion lights, untouched. For now. Somewhere behind those curtains, I knew Sandra was smiling. This wasn't random vandalism. This was organized. Her fingerprints might not be on the crowbars, but they were all over the intent. And now, she had a problem. Because she thought she'd sent cops to my door. She didn't realize she'd just sent amateurs into a federal sting. The pounding on my door rattled the frame. U.S. Marshals, a voice barked, sharp and rehearsed. Open up immediately. I didn't move. Instead, I switched screens on my phone, toggling between the front door camera and the one angled at the Porsche. Sure enough, two of them had broken formation, one circling around toward my garage, the other heading straight for my car with a Slim Jim glinting in his hand. Real cops don't split like that. Real cops don't work in silence while one pretends to yell authority at the front door. I let the pounding continue. The lead man shouted again, voice cracking this time. Open this door, or we'll force entry. I smiled. Do it. Please. Slowly, deliberately, I slid my badge from its case and clipped it to my belt. Then I holstered my sidearm. I wasn't going to fire unless I had to. But I wasn't stepping out unarmed either. I pulled the door open. 3 men froze mid-motion. They weren't in uniforms, just tactical vests, black cargo pants, ball caps pulled low. Their badges were shiny plastic knockoffs, dangling on cheap chains. Up close, it was pathetic. Halloween costumes, dressed up with menace. The leader recovered fast, shoving his fake badge toward me. Marshal's service. We have a warrant for the seizure of your vehicle. Step aside. My eyes locked on his, unblinking. Then, slowly, I held up my own badge, real, gleaming, heavy with weight and history. Funny thing, I said, my voice calm but sharp as glass. Because I am a U.S. Marshal. And I don't recall signing off on any warrant tonight. The silence hit them like a gunshot. The lookout by the Porsche stiffened, keys halfway in his hand. The leader's face drained of color. The third man shifted his weight, like he was considering running. You've got about 10 seconds, I continued, stepping onto the porch, to decide whether you want to add impersonating a federal officer to the long list of felonies you're already clocking. The leader stammered. This isn't what it looks like. I raised my phone, screen lit up with the live camera feed recording everything. It looks exactly like attempted grand theft auto, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, caught in high definition. Want me to keep listing? No one moved. The cul-de-sac was silent except for the hum of streetlights. My neighbor's curtains twitched, faint shadows behind glass. Everyone was watching, but nobody dared step outside. The third man finally bolted. He turned and sprinted down the street. That broke the spell. The one by the Porsche dropped his tool and stumbled after him. The leader hesitated, his fake badge trembling in his grip, then cursed under his breath and ran too. I didn't chase. I didn't need to. Every angle, every move, every word was already logged and streaming straight to the sheriff's office. I holstered my phone and stood in the driveway, my breath steady. The Porsche gleamed under the motion lights, untouched. For now. Somewhere behind those curtains, I knew Sandra was smiling. This wasn't random vandalism. This was organized. Her fingerprints might not be on the crowbars, but they were all over the intent. And now, she had a problem. Because she thought she'd sent cops to my door. She didn't realize she'd just sent amateurs into a federal sting. Sheriff Morales' cruiser rolled up with lights flashing, tires crunching against the pavement. He barely had time to put it in park before two deputies spilled out, hands hovering near their holsters. The three imposters hadn't gotten far. One tripped over his own boots trying to vault a hedge, another was tackled before he hit the corner. The leader froze when Morales barked. Down! Now! They obeyed, all bravado gone. Zip ties clicked into place. The cul-de-sac lit up in alternating red and blue, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Neighbors who had been peeking from behind curtains were now out on porches, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. I stayed where I was, calm, composed, badge still clipped to my belt. Morales approached me directly, his eyes sharp but respectful. You all right, Marshal? He asked. I nodded once. Never better. And you've got it all on tape. I handed him my phone, already queued up to the cloud-streamed footage. Wide angle, time-stamped, and impossible to dispute. 3 men in reflective vests marked HOA security, armed with crowbars, slim jims, and fake badges, caught mid-attempt to tow my Porsche. Morales' jaw tightened as he watched. This isn't some neighborhood prank. They came prepared. Organized crime, I said flatly. Hired muscle, sloppy disguises. Someone bankrolled this. The deputies searched the men, pulling out wallets stuffed with cash, burner phones, and a crumpled printout of my address with vehicle, Porsche 911 scribbled in bold marker. Evidence bags filled fast, crowbars, wheel clamps, the laminated badges that wouldn't fool a 5-year-old. Morales turned back to me. You got any enemies around here? People with motive? I didn't bother hesitating. Sandra Hole, vice president of the HOA. His brows lifted. You're sure? I gave him the kind of look that didn't need words. I've got months' worth of fines, threats, and harassment to connect the dots. Tires slashed last week. Anonymous notes. And now this stunt? Nobody else in Oakfield Estates wants me gone this bad. Morales exhaled slowly, glancing toward Sandra's house across the street. Her blinds were drawn tight, but I could almost feel her staring back, calculating her next move. Then we'll follow the trail, he said. If she's clean, fine. If not, we'll find out. He wasn't bluffing. The sheriff's department worked fast. The men were loaded into the back of cruisers, booked on attempted grand theft, assault, impersonating officers, and conspiracy. Their burner phones were tagged for forensics. Every Venmo payment, every text message, every digital breadcrumb would be traced. I watched the taillights fade as the deputies drove off, the imposters shouting hollow denials through the glass. The street quieted again, but the peace was temporary. My cameras still blinked red, recording, guarding. I knew Sandra wasn't done, not yet. But here's the thing about playing games with a U.S. Marshal, you don't get to choose the rules once the law steps in. Sandra had turned my driveway into a battleground. Now the battlefield was shifting into courtrooms, subpoenas, and indictments. And I was more than ready to fight on that ground too. The summons hit Oakfield Estates like a thunderclap. Neighbors who once whispered behind curtains were now receiving subpoenas. Deputies knocked on doors, asking for testimony, gathering screenshots, HOA emails, and old meeting notes. What once felt like idle gossip was suddenly evidence in a criminal conspiracy. Sandra Hull, the woman who strutted through every meeting like a queen on her throne, was about to stand trial. And her kingdom was unraveling, piece by piece. I sat in the courtroom the morning of the arraignment, my marshal's badge tucked discreetly inside my jacket. This wasn't my fight as law enforcement. I was here as a victim, as a witness, and maybe as a warning. Sandra entered in shackles. Orange jumpsuit. No pearls, no smug smirk, no clipboard. She still tried for a confident lift of her chin, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't in charge anymore. The district attorney wasted no time laying it out. Conspiracy to commit grand theft auto. Solicitation of assault. Impersonating law enforcement through hired agents. Fraud and abuse of HOA authority. Each count carried years, not months. When the prosecutor played the footage from my cameras, the jury leaned forward. High-definition angles of the imposters, badges flashing under motion lights, crowbars raised, the Porsche halfway prepped for tow. And then my badge, real and unmistakable, catching the porch light. The contrast was devastating. Sandra's defense attorney tried spinning it, overzealous neighbors. A misunderstanding. My client had no knowledge of these men. But the paper trail didn't lie. Venmo transfers from Sandra's account to one of the thugs. Text messages recovered from a burner, handle the Porsche. Teach him a lesson. Screenshots of HOA group emails where Sandra pushed to make an example of me. And then the neighbors took the stand. One by one, they told their stories. The bogus fines. The intimidation. The whispered threats after meetings. An older couple admitted they'd stayed silent out of fear. Another woman broke down crying, saying Sandra threatened to report her teenage son to police for loitering if she didn't vote her way on an HOA bylaw. The jury didn't just hear evidence. They heard fear, a community bullied into silence. By the end of the week, Sandra's smirk was gone. She sat hunched at the defense table, scribbling frantic notes that even her lawyer didn't bother reading. When the judge finally denied her bail, the gasps echoed through the gallery. Sandra wasn't going home. Not tonight. Not for a long time. Oakfield Estates felt different after that. The neighbors who once avoided eye contact now nodded at me when I drove past. Kids played outside again, parents chatting at the curb without constantly glancing toward Sandra's house. The cracks had spread. Sandra's crown was slipping. And soon, it was going to shatter completely. The courtroom was silent when the foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Sandra Hull, guilty on all counts. The words echoed like a gavel strike. Sandra's face collapsed, all the arrogance stripped away. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. Fragile. Powerless. The judge didn't waste time. 30 months in state prison. Restitution of $150,000 to the victim. Civil penalty of $50,000 to the county. And the court orders a lien against Ms. Hull's property to satisfy outstanding judgments. Sandra swayed as deputies cuffed her wrists. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. The Queen of Oakfield Estates was leading her kingdom in shackles. The 3 hired men had already folded, pleading guilty to impersonating officers and attempted grand theft. Each drew years behind bars, plus restitution. None of them dared glance my way as they were let out. But this wasn't just about them. This was about the HOA itself. Within days, board members resigned in disgrace. A court-appointed receiver stepped in to manage finances while lawsuits stacked up like bricks. Neighbors sued for harassment, for fines, for damages Sandra had levied under her bogus rules. By spring, Oakfield Estates wasn't ruled by fear anymore. The lawns were still trimmed, the mailboxes neat, but something deeper had shifted. Neighbors actually smiled at each other. Kids rode bikes without parents nervously checking windows. At the next community vote, new leadership was elected, people who wanted order, not control. As for me, I stayed. The Porsche remained in the driveway, a symbol of every battle they tried to fight against me. I didn't move out, didn't run, didn't bend. Because they tried to bully the wrong man. I backed up the footage in 3 separate drives, locked copies in evidence storage, and left one in my safe. Not because I needed it anymore, but because I never forget a war I fought. Neighbors sometimes asked me, quietly, how I'd stayed so calm when it all escalated. I'd just smile and say, because I knew something Sandra didn't. And when they leaned in, I'd let the truth hang in the air, simple and sharp. You don't send fake cops to steal from a U.S. Marshal. Justice had been served. The empire of fines and threats had crumbled. And Oakfield Estates finally found peace, because the wrong person tried to play the wrong game. And lost.